Department of Energy. Thanks everyone for being here today. This is our May meeting of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee for the for Building Performance Standards rulemaking. And just a note to everybody that this meeting is being recorded, mainly just so that we are able to go back if we need to review any comments that you all make in our as just as part of our rulemaking process. As we go through, maybe everyone can just kind of introduce themselves just in the chat. Just put who you are and who you're representing. That would be helpful. I don't think we need to go through and introduce ourselves. Again, we've done that the past couple times, just in person. But if you can just put it in the chat, I think that'll be good and just save a little bit of time. So I think with that, we can probably go ahead and just get started with the agenda. So today, basically what we wanted to cover, I'll give an update, just a brief update on a request for proposal that we put out that's now closed for EUI target setting to support our rulemaking process. And then we'll just start to go through the draft rules, chapters 4, 5, and 6. If you remember the last time around, we went through chapters 1 through 3, which are the scope, administration, and scope, purpose, and definitions of ASHRAE Standard 100 and how they apply for the Oregon BPS. So now we're just continuing to work through those chapters, the next chapters of ASHRAE Standard 100, making modifications to discuss how those sections apply for Oregon. So definitely hoping to get some feedback as we start to get into a little bit more of the heart of the BPS standards, more than just like definitions and scope. So look forward to what's hopefully a robust discussion today. And then I just wanted to note that certainly any comments that the RAC makes today, verbally are ones that we're taking notes and definitely make any comments as we go through, and we'll record those and we'll definitely document those here as we go through. But also, I provided that link to the comment forum. So if you do have any additional comments that you're able, either not able to make today, or you think about after the meeting, if you're going through the draft rules again, please do submit those via the comment portal. That also just kind of helps us to keep everything organized and make sure that we're tracking and that we can properly address all the comments that do come in. So, yeah, was there a question? Thought I heard a note there. Okay. Yeah, I think as we're going through, just if you do have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll try to address those. And Abby and Wendy, please kind of help me out to kind of manage and see if folks have made comments or in the chat or raise their hand, and if there's anything we need to address. So, with the agenda, for the EUI target setting update, we issued an RFP a couple months ago for a consultant to help us analyze building energy data, looking at a number of different sources for energy performance data, looking at potentially like Energy Star data, Portland benchmarking data, NEA, commercial building stock assessment data, to develop a methodology to develop the average energy use average energy use for various different types of buildings, and then help us develop the targets for those buildings. And that'll be kind of a key criteria as we work through the rulemaking. We received 4 proposals for that, and we're in the process of going through those now. We expect to have those kind of scored and evaluated shortly, and I think by the next meeting by the next RAC meeting, we should be able to kind of talk about that scope and talk about that moving forward with that consultant. So just to let you know, that's moving forward. And then one other thing I did want to go over today. I guess first, are there any questions on that target setting RFP before I move on from that section? Doesn't look like it. So one other thing, just because I've gotten some questions just on the kind of the flow of our draft review rulemaking process with regard to how the RAC input plays into the overall process. So I just put together this quick kind of flow chart, which we've kind of talked about in the past, but I didn't really provide a visual for it. So this is kind of the way that we're envisioning it going. If hopefully everyone is able to kind of see this. But we had our rulemaking meeting, our RAC meeting in April to cover chapters 1 through 3. Here we are on May 22nd, covering chapters 4 through 6. And this is the, like in blue at the top, like that's kind of the opportunity for the RAC to provide comments on our draft rules. And then what we're going to do is compile the RAC comments, compile any input that we get through the Rulemaking Advisory Committee process into a public comment draft. And we've scheduled a public meeting for the early part of next month, June 5th, where we hope to compile any comments that we got back in April from the RAC on chapters 1 through 3, and then any comments that we get today regarding chapters 4 through 6 today, and maybe into the rest of this week on chapters 4 through 6, and then we'll compile those and put those out for review to the public in the June 5th public meeting. So that's kind of the first phase, first cycle, and then we'll do the same thing again for the next couple RAC meetings, where we're kind of combining 2 RAC meetings worth of activity into one public comment draft, and then ultimately we'll roll up that public comment draft for a public rulemaking draft that happens in the fall, where that's the formal state rulemaking process, where it's open for about a month or so, and then we have a formal public rulemaking hearing before we file any final rules. So there's kind of 3 phases for input. The first phase is this RAC process. The second phase is that public comment draft, which is kind of a preliminary public opportunity to provide input. And then the third phase is the formal public rulemaking draft. And we certainly welcome rulemaking advisory committee meeting or rulemaking advisory committee input during this first phase. It's kind of the key section for RAC input, but definitely welcome RAC input during the other broader public phases of this process too. So hopefully this provides just a little bit of an overview of the flow, how we envision it happening. So there's kind of like 3 different phases and opportunities for input with every topic, every section. So, are there any general questions on this process flow before we kind of dive into the rules?
This is really helpful, Blake. I do have a question about process. So if we were to make a public comment, or we're making comments along the way here to help inform the rules, what is the timing to get our comments in to affect the June public meeting version, or is that version for the public meeting, is that informed by the RAC committee, or is that like a
it will be,
preview?
yeah, it
Okay.
will definitely be informed by the RAC. So that one is coming up pretty tight. It's in 2 weeks. So to kind of give us time, I kind of open for input there, but I think to kind of give us time for these first 6 chapters, ideally, I think we'd probably like to have input by the end of the week this week on these 6 chapters, if that sounds reasonable. Just to give us a little bit of time to roll them up and then get a version out for public review before that meeting. So
that sounds good. And I do think it's helpful just to have that kind of context when there's when you're sending kind of email updates on timing, and this is really helpful to see the schedule so that we know that there are some deadlines to affect the public comments versions. And then one other question for you. I know there was some talk about having a September meeting. Will we be done in July? Is that right?
There will be a September meeting.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't fit it all on this slide, but I tried to kind of indicate it on the on the right side.
Nice. Okay. Thank you.
I kind of ran out of space. But yeah, so this is just kind of the first couple phases, and then we'll have there is another kind of round there that just wouldn't fit on the slide. But, yeah, good questions. Thanks, man. Okay, I think with that, we can move into review of the draft rules. So the process that I was gonna use today was just to kind of go through the the same version of the Word document that's marked up, that's posted to the RAC SharePoint, and we can just kind of walk through those and give folks an opportunity to provide input and provide comment as we go through, and kind of answer any questions if there are any, and then mainly kind of take notes and listen for RAC input. We probably won't be able to make too many like direct modifications on the fly today, but what we want to get is that input as we walk through, so that we can then go back and address it. So I'll make sure I can kind of make this large enough for folks to read. Oops. Okay, so starting with chapter 4 is the compliance requirements chapter of Standard 100, and one of the things that I've noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed too, is that the ASHRAE standard itself refers to different sections of the standard quite a bit as you go through, where so chapter 4, even though it's titled compliance requirements, still refers a lot and kind of references and leans on future chapters that we still haven't gotten to yet in our review. So what it really does is it kind of provides that initial charging language, kind of an outline for buildings to point to different sections about, okay, if a building has targets, then it needs to comply with with these future sections of the standard. So even though it's called compliance requirements, it's more of an outline for the requirements. So just kind of keep that in mind. And one of the things that we're considering, we'd like to be able to do as we work through the future sections of the standard, is to potentially consolidate some of these to make it a little bit more intuitive with the way that it's organized. One of the things that we're kind of recognizing is that you end up, when you're reading the standard itself, you end up jumping from one section to the next. That's something that we're kind of keeping in mind as we go through, but I'm not really sure exactly how much we'll be able to do that. One of the main reasons is because in the end, one of the final products that we're going to have is hopefully an integrated version of the Standard 100, which we've worked with ASHRAE to create a licensing agreement, so that after we make our Oregon modifications, we'll be able to go back and create like an integrated ASHRAE Standard 100 for Oregon, and we'll work with ASHRAE to do that. And similar to the way that Washington did it, if you've seen that, where we have like different color text for the modifications that Oregon's made. So the more like reorganization that we do to the standard itself would make that integrated version just a little bit more challenging to manage and to implement. So if there's any opportunities for kind of reorganization to simplify the structure, without losing the substantive pieces of it, we'll definitely look for those. But just one thing to kind of keep in mind as we go through. So with the compliance forms, compliance requirements, section 4 and 4.1 starts to talk about the forms for recording information and demonstrating compliance with the standard. And ASHRAE puts all these forms in a normative appendix, Appendix A. And we haven't gotten yet to this Appendix A, but that'll be part of a future RAC meeting. But what it really does is it just provides all the information that will need to be reported to document compliance with the BPS. And they're mostly in like paper form, format. We do not plan on requiring paper submittals for anything. We will ultimately have a software platform that hasn't yet been specified to document and report compliance. But this appendix, normative Appendix A in the ASHRAE standard, if you're familiar with the Washington BPS, it's very similar to Washington. It's called Annex Z in the Washington BPS, but it'll be similar to that, and we'll cover that in a future meeting. But basically what we were trying to do here was just specify that the compliance forms will need to be submitted to ODO as the authority having jurisdiction, and will be done electronically in a manner that we specify at a future date. That's not part of the process now. That's more part of implementation after rulemaking's complete. So now we'll talk a little bit about the building type requirements. So a building or a complex of buildings whose majority of gross floor area has activities in table 7.1. And so I can go to table 7.1 next, but shall comply with the requirements of this section, pretty much 4.3, 4.4, and 4.5. And what table 7.1 does is it really outlines, I'll just skip there for now. It outlines all the different covered building types. So what we did here is just pull the different covered building types from basically from the Washington list. And those are all based on Energy Star Portfolio Manager building types and subtypes. And then we removed the tier 2 type buildings from this list. So this just covers all the tier 1 buildings that will ultimately have a target associated with them for most of the building types for compliance. So it kind of points a user to this table to reference their building type and reference their target. And then says for those types of buildings, you've got to look toward the compliance requirements in this chapter. And then for tier 1 buildings is kind of the next step. The covered buildings, the qualified person determining compliance shall determine whether or not the building seeking compliance has targets. And then, maybe I'll take this opportunity to talk a little bit about what qualified person is. So if we kind of go back to our definitions from the last time. So this is where there is some requirement, some certification level required to be the qualified person that's actually performing the analysis for, okay, what is the building energy use intensity? How does it compare to the target? And the one that's ultimately tasked with doing the reporting for compliance to ODO. So, right now we've got a number of criteria where a person would qualify as that qualified person. And that's either a licensed architect or engineer, an energy auditor, a certified energy manager, a person with a building operator certification, level 2, commissioning professional, and energy management professional, or and this is one that we've added after some discussion with Lane Community College. So somebody with Lane Community College Energy Management Building Controls Program degree. And then we've got this kind of open-ended. So in the future, we might identify additional certifications that would qualify somebody to be a qualified person for program reporting purposes. So we've kind of left it open there if we do determine that there's another qualification that would match. So again, it's on.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
It's like
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time reading the screen too. Is it possible
Okay.
to increase?
I can, yeah. Let's
Oh,
see.
thank you.
Is that getting any better?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for
Appreciate
the
that.
comment.
On the
Yeah.
qualified person, you mentioned that there's a qualified person for determining the EUI, meeting the EUI target. And are you saying there's a different qualified person? So that's like determining compliance, a different qualified person to submit the report? Or is it the same?
It could be the same qualified person.
Okay.
Yeah, was that the question? Yeah.
Yeah, so the question I would have is actually a little bit separate, but I don't think we get to it in ASHRAE 100, is the savings to investment ratio. So with which qualified person would be determining that savings to investment ratio? And is that going to be included in administrative rules for how ODO is going to evaluate it? That seems like it's a fairly easy way out.
Yeah, so we haven't gotten yet to that investment criteria pathway. But it sounds like there's some interest in creating some criteria for the person that makes that determination. Is that kind of where you're going with that?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it seems like it's two different sets of qualifications.
Yeah, so with I mean, if somebody's doing an energy audit to determine the savings, they would need to be a qualified energy auditor. So there's that other level of certification, and that's either right now it's either having a ASHRAE building energy assessment professional or a certified energy auditor certification or a licensed architect or engineer. So there's some level of qualification to get to the point to be the one to do the energy audit, which would inform the energy savings and investment too. But no, that is an area that we've heard from our counterparts in other states that have implemented it, that could be a challenge to avoid that. I think that loophole that you're probably hinting at of somebody or a building owner just saying that, hey, there's no cost-effective energy measures for us to do. All the savings to investment ratios are less than one, and potentially using that investment criteria pathway as a as a way out. But
So
we haven't. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
where would that be included in the administrative rules? Is that something that we look at later after ASHRAE 100, or should we be looking at it as we are talking about qualified persons now?
Yeah, I think that'll be part once we get to the savings, that investment criteria pathway sections of the rules. I think that's when we can have a little bit more deeper discussion about it.
Okay,
But I think it will be part of the rules, but it's not part of the chapters today.
Mhm.
But I'm taking some notes. Okay.
Hi, Blake. So just a quick follow-up on that, I guess. Which meeting do you expect that we'll get to this piece, just so we can do some thinking about it in advance?
Yeah, I think I'll have to look at our schedule. I don't have it off the top of my head. But maybe actually, well, right now, let's see. Yeah, I'll send that out. I'll have to look at our schedule. Thanks. Sorry, I don't have that off the top of my head. Okay, I guess moving down the draft. So for tier 1 buildings, again, it's on the responsibility of that qualified person to establish the performance targets according to Section 7, submit the information to ODO in a manner that we specify. And then the ASHRAE 100 had some language in there around, because ASHRAE 100 provides a pathway for either whole building compliance or individual tenant space compliance. The Oregon's BPS is based on whole building compliance, so we removed that section. And then we also just removed the sections about submitting forms, specific forms, because we kind of cover that up above in item C. And then we also removed the references. It's got a separate, ASHRAE 100 as a separate pathway for residential buildings. So we removed those references in there too, along with the buildings with residential and non-residential activities. Multifamily buildings won't be subject to the tier 1 BPS requirements. And that mostly covers 4.2, and then 4.3 provides that outline for the energy and emissions management plan and operations maintenance program, kind of just pointing to future sections of the standard. So the operations and maintenance requirements, building managers shall comply with operations and maintenance O&M sections requirements of Section 6. The qualified person shall determining compliance shall state in writing that O&M requirements have been met. So that'll be, again, just part of the electronic reporting for compliance, the system that we specify in the future. For the energy management plan, the building manager shall comply with the management requirements of Section 5. Qualified person, again, states in writing and submits that to ODO that it's been developed and it's being maintained. And then for building performance, So there's kind of a different.
Sorry, Blake.
Yeah.
I have a question before we get
Sure.
there.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So on the energy management plans, there's also emissions management.
Yeah.
Could you clarify why we're including emissions here when we're not covering emissions by the policy?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. So further on down in the actual, in chapter 5, I've actually, I guess I didn't pick this up above, but I've struck out the emissions components to just about the entire chapter. But that is one thing I did flag and wanted to hopefully have a little bit of discussion around today. So even though emissions are not the BPS is based completely on site energy usage for Oregon, is there any desire to include a requirement for owners to consider emissions in their energy management plan? Or should it just be simplified to only consider energy usage? Definitely open and wanting some feedback from the RAC today on that. So let's maybe pause on that topic until we get to chapter 5.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Then I'll come back up here. Let's see. Okay, so kind of depending on how we what we arrive at when we get to chapter 5, we might just end up striking that part of it. But so for building performance, the measured energy use intensity, the qualified person, this is another role for that qualified person, shall calculate the building's measured energy use intensity in completing the forms. C1, Form C1 is just a way to aggregate all of the energy usage of a site and calculate the energy use intensity, EUI. And then we also included this, or we're using similar software calculations, because I imagine most folks will just do this in something like Portfolio Manager or another building energy management system. So somebody doesn't need to physically fill out this form to determine their EUI. So there will be some, as we go through the process to develop our performance targets for the buildings, there will be some, most buildings will have a specific target, an EUI target with a quantifiable number that needs to be met. There will be some buildings that are tier 1 buildings that are covered buildings that don't have targets because we maybe simply just didn't have enough data to develop a meaningful, appropriate target for that building this time around. So that process and that potential is considered in ASHRAE 100. So the compliance process for buildings with targets is to meet, either meet the target, or if you don't meet the target, then you have to do an audit. And that's pretty much what these sections 4.4.2.1, 0.2, and 0.3 outline. So you have to look at what your target is. If you don't meet, if you do meet the target, then you comply. If you don't meet the target, then this 4.4.2.3 kicks in, and then an energy audit needs to be performed by a qualified energy auditor to determine the energy efficiency measures that need to be implemented in order to get down to the target. One thing that we've removed from just about every reference to the audit, there's always this reference to EEM's, energy efficiency measures, and ERM's, emissions reduction measures. We removed that emissions reduction measure component from the audit because Oregon's standard is based on site energy use efficiency. But one thing that I did want to kind of put out there for the RAC is, and Standard 100 kind of describes the audit as an energy audit with a decarbonization assessment. Even though that's not a requirement and it won't inform compliance for Oregon's BPS, is that still something that should be a critical required component of the audit that's required under BPS? So I don't know if anybody has any, I'm talking specifically about this decarbonization assessment piece. If anybody has any hard feelings either way about that. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I think
I might need a little help understanding this better.
Yeah.
So you're saying that and it's regarding what we're seeing right now. Are you referring to the crossed out sections on measuring GHGIs and asking us if we think that should be included, or is it something else?
So it's not. So we won't have like GHGIs because those are like greenhouse gas intensity targets. But
Right.
is it useful as part of the building performance standards program when somebody's required to do an audit to meet their EUI? Is it useful or beneficial for them to also include in that audit for to inform their own process, the emissions reductions potential associated with their energy measures?
so Blake, since
Yeah.
since the goal of the VPS is to maximize emissions reductions, probably as a part of an education for the building owner, the decarbonization assessment might be helpful in case that informs decision making on top of energy efficiency measures.
Yeah. And you're saying just from a building owner helpfulness perspective?
Yeah, I mean, like again, since if there can be decisions made on an array of measures that could be implemented to reduce energy consumption, maybe there are measures that are have a higher decarbonization potential than others, and so that can be part of the decision-making process. So it seems like in terms of an informed market and in spirit of the legislation to reduce emissions, maximize reduction potential, I think additional information might be helpful. I do recognize though that there's discussion like how much assessment, like how much is necessary to to achieve this goal. But generally, I would propose to keep it in, at least for now, to see if it helps educating the market on the decarbonization potential of certain measures that their audit might be prescribed.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Kevin, I see a raised hand. Kevin Duell. Kevin, if you're speaking, we're not hearing you. Are you able to come off mute?
Sorry, double muted.
There you go. Yeah.
The trick with including that is that the BPS is based on site energy, whereas emissions should be source-based because that's the true measure of emissions, is all the emissions that you're creating. But low legislation doesn't include source energy, even though ASHRAE can. I know that was specifically decided against. But the standard is capable of that. The tables are built in, or at least the methodology is built in. So from a informed decision argument, yeah, if the owner knows the source energy, or excuse me, the source emissions involved with a particular choice, I think that'd be very helpful. From a site energy or site emission standpoint, that would just be an electrification measure because electricity doesn't have any site emissions, but it does have source emissions. And that wouldn't be a informed decision on the part of the owner.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Kevin. Ben?
Yeah, along a similar line, I do think it's helpful to the program to include that, since the stated goals are to reduce emissions. But getting back to what we're doing with the rest of the standard and how it's based on site energy use, this one statement, if we leave it in and wipe out all the other greenhouse gas targets, is kind of on an island. And I don't know like taken out of context like that, and unless we provide some kind of alternate compliance path that takes emissions into account, I don't know that that's particularly useful for the owners. I'm personally inclined to leave it in, though, because that is, again, the stated goal of this program, even though we're not specifically targeting that.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Ben. Vin.
Thanks. I'm thinking about Washington State and then Seattle's new carbon performance standards. I think they call them building emissions performance standards. So since the city of Seattle is looking at decarbonization and the state is looking at energy reduction, and as I understand, because of state preemption, we have some similar issues here in places like Portland and the overall state of not being able to, where local jurisdictions can't simply, they don't have the home rule authority to have their own energy efficiency standards. So carbon is the pathway. So I think thinking as cities like Portland and others move forward on to meet their climate goals, I think it'd be helpful for owners to have the decarbonization assessments now with the states. They have a sense of if this is going to happen at the local level, as Seattle's kind of has done with Washington. I think if those decarbonization assessments have been done in Washington, I'm sure that it's helpful to all the folks in Seattle. Similarly, all the folks in Portland right now who've reported commercial buildings since 2015 have a leg up on getting ready for the state's building performance standards. So I'm inclined to say that it's beneficial to have it in. I don't see there's a future where we aren't thinking about carbon generally. And so I do think it's different than a GHGI target where it's just here's how you could decarbonize too. And I also wanted to speak to site versus source EUI. So we use site EUI reported to portfolio manager at the city of Portland. And that does include electricity. So there's a greenhouse gas emission factor that is included in the site EUI that's based on kilowatt hours consumed. So there's definitely the site EUI does include that. There's multiple reasons why we don't use source EUI. And so we're really getting into the building level of intervention, not necessarily at the generation level intervention. That's one main reason. But also, I think there's consistency on source EUI. So there's loss of energy in transmission lines that are included with source EUI. And if we include that, something that we don't see on source EUI is the loss of methane along natural gas lines, and methane being something like 10,000 times more potent greenhouse gas. I think is I don't feel like we're doing an apples to apples comparison if we look at source EUI.
Yeah, thanks, Finn. Okay, well, yeah, I appreciate the comments on that, on the decarbonization assessment piece. We'll definitely take those into account as we move forward. It sounds like there's overall maybe some interest in kind of keeping that in, even if it's not a direct explicit component of meeting the Oregon BPS, but that it aligns with the overall goal, the stated goals of the BPS, the legislation, and that it could potentially help inform future local BPS, like what's potentially moving forward in Portland. So, okay. Let's see, kind of moving down this line. So if you don't meet the performance target, qualified energy auditor needs to complete an audit according to Section 8. Energy efficiency measures that reduce energy use to meet the target shall be implemented according to Section 9. And then upon completion, the building shall be granted conditional compliance with those. So the conditional compliance pathway is one where you can, if you don't meet the target, but you've identified measures and you do the measures, but the measures haven't had enough time to actually be in place yet to document a full year's worth of energy reductions, there's this conditional compliance timeline. So I did want to, oh, Alex, yeah.
I don't know now, I can't find my notes, but I was curious, and maybe this is somewhere else. Once you on a conditional compliance pass, how do you get back to a regular compliance? And whether that potentially needs some clarification, how a building, once that it's on a conditional compliance pass, can remedy that and get back into full compliance?
Yeah, that is kind of later on, but
Okay.
essentially the pathway there would be documenting an EUI that meets the target.
Okay, and
And
that's
so-
laid out how that works.
Yeah.
Because you
Yeah.
want to
It will
ensure,
be.
right, that conditional compliance buildings are still working towards getting into full compliance.
Yeah.
Ah, cool. Thank you. Thanks.
So I did want to add, to kind of maybe spend some time discussing this one too. So for more recently built buildings, and this is a pathway that is in the Washington standard, where Washington essentially requires that more recently built buildings meet a target that's 15% more efficient than other buildings. We're still limited for the targets to be at the most as stringent as the average EUI. But essentially, Washington provides a different, separate, and a little bit more stringent requirement for newer buildings to have to meet a target that's 15% more efficient. And if they don't meet that 15% more efficient target, but they do meet the standard EUI target for that building type, there's still a pathway that they can use to implement commissioning measures in order to document and show conditional compliance. So I wanted to point this one out and just kind of explore the opportunity or the need to include a pathway like this in Oregon, or if there's also the potential just to treat all buildings the same regardless of when they were built. I think any new building that's built to the Oregon Energy Code within the last few cycles is going to be especially now, is going to be a very efficient building already, and in just about all cases, I think would have no trouble meeting a VPS. I'm sure there are going to be some cases where a new building, just due to the way it's operating or the way that it's its energy intensive features, perhaps doesn't meet an EUI target where that exists. And I think that's something that we'll kind of have to think about, how that building might might be able to comply. But so that's always the option, is to kind of treat all buildings the same, whether or not it's a new building or an old building, or should we have a more stringent requirement for newer buildings because they're built to a more stringent code. Kevin, looks like you have a raised hand.
Yeah, thanks, Blake. I'm just doing the conceptual math here. So if the legislation says that the target can't be more stringent than the average, then this section, I think you'd have to have a target for everyone else that's 15% worse than the average.
That's right. Yeah. So a new building would only be able to have a more stringent target where the target for that building type wasn't at the average, because we still can't go beyond the average.
Gotcha. Okay,
so
that makes sense.
Yeah, so if it turned out that the target that we set for a specific building is not at the average, which we haven't, we'll be going through that target setting procedure soon. It would only be available for, or applicable, if the targets aren't quite at the average. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, no, yeah, your math is tracking there. Alex?
Yeah, essentially, following up on that, I think that means since we're currently anticipating that all buildings have to meet the average, we would exclude buildings if we would require only new buildings to meet that average, and all other buildings less. So I'm in favor with rather, the broader approach that all buildings have to meet the average, since that's the ceiling that's allowed in the legislation.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Alex. Then,
And just to follow up on my thought, oh, sorry,
oh,
jumping ahead there.
oh,
Kevin.
I thank you. I I know we haven't defined what these numbers are yet, and I guess I'm not sure how that's even going to happen. I think like was just suggested, the average would be the standard, but I suppose there could be a particular building type that, for whatever reason, isn't the average, that the target would be higher. I'm not sure why that would be the case, but maybe there's a compelling reason for that, and then this section could come into play like you were describing. But yeah, otherwise I tend to agree. I think the average is probably what we're shooting for, but I don't know. That's a very complex process, I know, that has yet to be done. So
yeah,
cool. Thank you.
yeah, thanks, Kevin. Vin?
Yeah, I think we'll get to part of this later when we start thinking about like buildings that don't really have an average,
Mhm.
like convention centers. But in the meantime, just generally, I really like this approach I'm imagining from Washington of having commissioning, which is really, a much higher level of intervention than just an energy audit and identifying EMs. Because if a newly constructed building, and this isn't always gonna be true, but generally a newly constructed building isn't performing as well as the average within its building sector, I think that's concerning, and that something's wrong with the operations and maintenance. And a lot of the work that MBI has done in the past has looked at like LEED certified buildings that are built to, and some of them are like built to this really exemplary performance. And then they go and like look at what the EUIs are, and they're off the charts. They end up being below average buildings in terms of EUI, even though it's just comparing a medium-sized office building to a medium-sized office building that's out there in the world. So these things happen, especially when we have like more innovative systems that can be out of whack, and that commissioning, although it can be expensive, is the way to bring the system back into balance. So I really like the language for newly constructed. I think you just need to identify more clearly what you mean by recently constructed.
Yeah, thanks. I think, yeah, we did add
sorry, go ahead.
add a definition for recently constructed, and that's similar to the way that Washington defined it too. It's like it would be pretty much any building built from the 2019 code and more recently. So yeah.
I just want.
Oh,
go
Kevin,
ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go, Kevin, please.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. I just wanted to second what Vin said about commissioning. It's the final QC on a prototypical product. I mean, every building is a unique enterprise, so especially an advanced design, it really needs to be checked. And years ago, came across some studies on this, that commissioning is a very effective energy efficiency measure. It's not cheap, but the savings can be instant and amazing. So yeah, I think that's obviously the building, if it's not complying, there needs to be a question, well, why? And commissioning is the way to answer that. So I think that would be a nice addition.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, I just wanted to, Vin, I think if I really understood what you're saying, that there's aspirational buildings who are predicted to be low energy consumers and then turn out not to be. And we just talked about the reasons why. But since the BPS is actual energy consumption, there would still be having to improve and comply with the BPS. So just making sure that, and that's also a consideration with code, like buildings that are built to code, current code, and then not meeting the BPS because of failures to commission or others. Or like I think I saw a comment in the chats too that certain energy efficiency measures are weed out. So that's the kind of the conundrum between codes or predictors of EY and actual performance. But I think in terms of the goals, like if we have outliers because of like issues in design or commissioning, they still would have to comply. I still want to make sure that the average is the goal for buildings so that we're kind of maximizing the carbon reduction potential of the BPS. If I understood you right, Min.
Yep, I'm in agreement.
All right, thanks everyone for that input on that section. So moving, if there's no other comments on that section, moving forward. So for this is again like if a building doesn't comply and they need to doesn't meet the performance targets rather, and they need to do an audit, then 15 months after completion of that section 4.4.2.3, the building doesn't meet the performance targets in the audits, you got to recalculate the EUI based on 12 consecutive months, after you do the energy efficiency measures, and then resubmit. And then, Alex, this probably kind of goes back to, it starts to address, and maybe it needs to be a little bit more clear, but it kind of starts to address that condition about like after if you're in conditional compliance and then you document 12 months of EOI performance that's better than the target, then you would be, compliant with it. Or it's got these other, if there's other pathways, if the EOI is still greater than the target, then there's a pathway for conditional compliance to be suspended until you either do more EEMs that reduce it, they meet the target, or ultimately the potential for just revoking that conditional compliance if there's no other progress being made, and then a building could become non-compliant.
Okay, what you're saying is this is essentially a 12 months reset. That's what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. So there's got to be 12 months. Like, so within 15 months of doing and completing the energy efficiency measures, the building owner needs to take at least a full year's worth of data, 12 months of data, and resubmit that. Right.
Right.
Yeah, kind of like a 12-month reset to document that, hey, we either now meet the energy use intensity targets or we don't. And if we don't, are we doing additional measures to get there?
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Blake, is there's a 15-month window and a 12-month window. Is the 3-month window then is for them to complete the EEMs, basically?
I think the other, so the 15-month window, the 15-month timeline starts after you do
after you
the
said
measures.
that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So it just kind of lets you pick 12 months within that. It gives you a few months to gather your data.
I gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you.
So the 4.4.2 covered buildings with performance targets. There will be a path for buildings without performance targets. There's some buildings, like Ben mentioned before, like convention centers, where maybe we just don't have enough data. Data centers are one building type in Washington that doesn't have a performance target. So the process for those buildings, because there's not a strict EUI that needs to be compared to and needs to be met, is that those buildings need to perform an audit, hire a qualified energy auditor to conduct an audit, and then implement this optimized bundle, which is a bundle of energy measures that has a favorable savings to investment ratio, and have those implemented. And then after implementation, there's this documentation for, I'll just kind of skip over. These are just charts that outline the compliance process for buildings with and without performance targets. But essentially, after implementation of those measures, then again, there's that 15-month kind of window to gather your data and gather a full year's worth of data of implementing the optimized bundle, the building owner needs to submit verification that at least 75% of the anticipated energy savings from the audit are being achieved. And that's the pathway for a building without a target. So the building has an EUI, it does an audit, identifies all the cost-effective measures, and then a building owner needs to implement those measures and then document that at least 75% of the savings are being achieved.
And Blake, is there a mechanism here to capture that data to then have data for those types of buildings, or is that even desirable? If you know what I mean, like if enough folks are doing this alternate path, could there then be a collection of data points to say, oh, we have a target now? Or are these just too squirrely?
Oh, I see. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so every 5 years we will be reassessing the energy performance standard and the targets. So that is the potential for, right now because we don't have a statewide benchmarking law, we're kind of working on the data that we do have from available sources. I would imagine, and this is just looking kind of forecasting into the future, we'll see what actually comes, but I would imagine in 5 years or 5 years after we have actual data for like real covered buildings in Oregon, we'll have a lot better information on like what buildings' actual performance is, and we might actually have enough data then to be able to determine targets for these buildings that previously didn't have a target. So.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah. So with the next iteration, with the next cycle, a building that doesn't have a target might get a target if we have enough meaningful data to support that. So then this is that like 4.4.3.4 just kind of covers the pathways for verification for compliance for buildings that don't have targets. And it's got these two pathways within it for buildings that have and don't have building energy monitoring. And it basically references, if folks are familiar with the IP MVP, the International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol, it outlines these kind of 4 different options A through D for documenting energy savings. So it just kind of points to that protocol that's a widely referenced protocol in energy efficiency savings realms for different ways to document savings depending on the level of metering that you have. So it just provides a couple of different pathways for showing those. Particularly, sometimes you might not be able to show if you're actually achieving 75% of the energy efficiency measure savings if you don't have like sub metering on those specific pieces of equipment. So that's where the need for having the 2 pathways for with and without building energy monitoring comes in. Looks like Alex has a hand.
Yeah, so it looks like we defined optimized bundle. We probably did, right? I have to go back and look at it.
That's a standard definition in the ASHRAE 100 standard. So I don't think we can go back and look at it now if you want, but
it's fine. I can look at it later. Thank you.
Yeah, that one is in the standard. So and then the last section of Chapter 4 is just the general administrative requirements that building owners shall demonstrate compliance with the standard by following the administrative requirements in normative appendix. And this is where we haven't yet, we'll get to this appendix later on. This is that appendix in Washington that is called Appendix Z. We'll name it when we develop it, but it'll provide the pathway, like the kind of specific requirements for what needs to be submitted to demonstrate compliance with the standard. So, and then we struck the section for alternative energy use targets because ASHRAE 100 has this other pathway for alternative targets, and that won't be adopted. In Oregon, we'll have set targets. So now, kind of getting to, Alex, you still have a raised hand, or was that from before? There we go. Okay.
Sorry, that was from before.
So, no problem. So Chapter 5 defines that energy and emissions management plan, but as you'll see, we've tried to strike out that and emissions component of it, because that won't be something that the Oregon BPS is based on. So the building owner shall designate an energy manager to develop and maintain an energy and emissions plan for the building. So, you know, again, I guess I just put in like this other comment here too. So even if we're not asking for, you know, any sort of emissions as part of the BPS compliance, is it like, is it useful at all to include that in the plan? Mainly, this would be to help inform a building owner. Is there still value there? So I guess I did kind of strike it out in a lot of places, but then also just wanted to put this back out there to the RAC too, to see if there's any feedback there, or would this just kind of complicate the overall plan, and maybe the plan should just be focused on energy, if it's not something that we as an agency are going to actively look for in the plan. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts there, because we won't be like, as an agency, we like won't be providing like specific I think emissions factors or anything like that for an agency to use in their plan. That would help them kind of put it together. So we'll just be mainly focused on the energy management piece.
Yeah, this is Kevin again. I would just, I guess, ditto my comments from earlier. And also, energy reductions are emissions reductions. I mean, it's not just a proxy. It's
Mhm.
one leads to the next. I just recall the legislation. Yeah, there's an overall goal for emissions reductions, but the actual measurement or mechanism for achieving that is EUI, site EUI specifically.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, I think similar to the audit, I think it's informative. So I would tend to keep it again, like, you know, since once we have the assessment, to keep that in the management plan. But yeah, same discussion like as for, you know, the pros and cons. But I think I'd be inclined to keep it there. So specifically if there's local jurisdictions who are interested in addressing emissions, so that consistency is there.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Vin?
Maybe one way to be in line with the legislation and to assist local governments is to, as part of an energy management plan, to include what the emissions are. So emissions management suggests to me that there has to be management of the carbon emissions or some of the greenhouse gas emissions to get to a target. So that seems like a stretch, I guess, with this legislation. But for to Alex's point, you know, decarbonization assessment for the state to monitor its progress towards its greenhouse gas goals, because certainly we use the carbon emissions in Portland that are reported through Portfolio Manager based inside EUI. We use that metadata to measure our progress on our carbon emissions by building sector, and then try to direct incentives to the buildings that need the most help, for instance. So that becomes part of our overall city emissions management plan too. But what I think the part that's probably most helpful is just to make sure that emissions are reported, and that, you know, it's a decarbonization assessment that they have to get, and then that they're aware of what their emissions are as they change over time. So, and we had talked about this, I think, early on, that there was an intention to have emissions factors that are utility based and not the regional emission factor. I think we talked about that, and you have to remind me. But I think that makes sense, and it probably should show up within the energy management plan, like what the emissions are.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I'm looking at 5.1.23. Like you could have an energy management plan, like that a portfolio manager allows you to do that, right? That
Yeah.
has the GHG emissions versus a GHGI. Oh,
Yeah.
does that
Okay.
get to your point, Alex?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's still a difference between the targets, right? The GHGI and just understanding emissions in general, like what are the emissions associated with the building operation, and then can it be managed for it? Again, that I'm just referring back to the goal of the statute to maximize reductions. So even though we're doing it via the EUI and energy consumption, for building owners to understand how that impacts the emission, I think is helpful to, in light of the spirit of the legislation.
And Vin, you were talking earlier about or maybe just now, that Portland uses the reported KWH and then a utility specific factor to get to emissions. Is that right?
We actually use a regional factor that is built into Portfolio Manager right now, and our climate action plan for years used the same factor. It's the Northwest Planning Pool, I believe, is the
Oh, sure. Yeah. Familiar with that.
right. It's really close to PG's actually, mix. Although PG's is starting to change now. But Seattle doesn't like to use it because Seattle City and Light, it performs much better on their, because they're like 99% renewable. So, and then as we start to see our progress between our utilities, we certainly have considered whether or not we should back calculate out that the emission factor that is an eGrid that
Right.
is part of Portfolio Manager, and then recalculating by electric utility what the actual emission factors are. All of it tends to have like a year or two lag also, so it's imperfect either way,
Sure.
but I think it's helpful to have it broken out by utility as we start to move towards these longer targets. And so when I heard that in an earlier meeting, I thought that's a good sign for us to update our ordinance at some point to align with the state.
Yeah, and I think
Well,
just to kind of confirm along those lines with the assessment and evaluation that we intend to do after we get the data, when we have to like look at and tie emissions back to the energy usage, the activity data that we get, we will definitely look at applying and intend to apply utility specific factors. Like if a building is in mostly a consumer owned utility territory that gets most of their electricity from BPA, then they'll have a very low emissions factor for electricity compared to another, a different site. And we'll look to make those as granular and as specific to the utilities as possible for specific buildings. So
gotcha. And
when
so
we're doing
this,
our accounting, yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah. So this gets back to what we were talking about earlier, that then you are addressing source emissions. That's fantastic.
yeah, okay, yeah, thanks. Looks like we've got Kara and then JP with hands raised.
Thanks so much. Yeah, just Blake, wanting to make sure you're seeing some of the comments in the chat because there's some.
Yeah,
Good.
I am. Yeah. So, yeah, thanks. I'm kind of checking the chat periodically, and feel free,
That's great.
definitely, if folks just want to make comments in the chat, that's great too.
Okay, that's fine. And then I wanted to just sort of tease out a little bit, maybe what your thinking is now that you've heard from RAC members support for sort of thinking about providing businesses with more information. More information is better, right? In terms of planning and aligning with emissions reductions goals. Do you anticipate then that you could provide, when you initiated this conversation, you were thinking that maybe you couldn't provide some of that information like emissions factors, et cetera. But would it be particularly burdensome for the agency to offer that level of technical assistance? It just like it is in line with the purpose of the statute and will ensure the success too of these efforts.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Most of the feedback that I'm hearing today from the RAC is to like still include these like emissions assessments components into the audit, into the plan, even though we won't be asking for like greenhouse gas intensity um, like metrics for each building. And yeah, as far as like calculating the emissions from a building, I know it's, I think that's something like we could be open to including some assistance for, although I think most of our assistance will be dedicated toward the actual elements that are part of the Oregon BPS. But in that case, we would still look to like the emissions factors that are published by other state agencies. The Oregon Department of Environmental Quality does a utility-specific emissions factor analysis for Oregon utilities every year. And again, that's kind of like been mentioned. It's a little bit lagging sometimes. Just it takes a year or two to gather the data and determine that factor, similar to the eGrid process too. And I don't know exactly where. I've heard that portfolio manager may in the future have an ability to customize and enter in utility specific emissions factors. That's something that we would definitely continue to explore. I think that would make the emissions quantifications a whole lot easier if we could just build in the utility specific factors that we want to in there and just let a building owner use that as the accounting methodology. But yeah, I think we'd probably have to think through a little bit the level of technical analysis that we provide and support on that, just because it's not a direct component of the Oregon BPS, but it's definitely associated and certainly one of the overall goals of the program. Hopefully that answers the question, Kara, a little bit.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. JP?
Oh yeah, just going back to the what was it, 5.1.1, we were talking about energy and emissions management plan. I think generally I'm in agreement with that. Like those two things are often used interchangeably for obvious reasons. The one point I would mention is that sometimes when we're talking about an emissions management plan in the industry, we might be talking specifically about energy procurement or procuring offsets. So, and I don't think that's really going to be a problem because that's not something that this legislation is talking to, but it's just probably worth mentioning that like that is quite specific as far as, if we're looking at energy procurement, that could be targeting emissions and it could do nothing to the EUI of a building. So there is a distinction there. Just wanted to flag that, but generally, if you're not being super specific and if you're actually not asking for an emissions management plan in that narrow sense, yeah, those two things are used interchangeably.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I appreciate all this feedback on this one. So it just to kind of summarize, hopefully, it kind of sounds like we're interested in including the emissions as a component of the energy management plan, but not maybe calling it an emissions management plan, more like an energy management plan with, similar to before, like with emissions assessment sort of thing. Does that kind of characterize the feedback and the group discussion so far? Hopefully. Not hearing any opposition, so I think we can move on to the next section where it actually starts to detail out the components of an energy management plan. So maybe we can take some time to kind of go through this about, so the energy management plan shall incorporate the following. So one thing we can, shall is pretty direct language. And when we go to implement our compliance checks on the program, if a building owner needs to submit their energy management plan and we've got this language in there, shall, then each one of these items would be something that we would look for compliance. So something to kind of think about how we would address this and look at this in the future. So should, something put out for the RAC's comment would be like, should this stay as a shall? Should it be as a may? Should some of these elements perhaps be removed from the energy management plan. Some of these get pretty specific and pretty potentially complex and detailed. So they outline each one of these. So they got 5.1.2 is the section, and then 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, all the way down through 0.13, 5.1.2, actually 14, that outlines the different components that need to be part of a management plan. So there are things like it kind of starts out with like I think things that are necessary, like some way to like how is the building accounting for their energy use, and how is the building recording it, what is the energy use intensity. These are things that a building owner is going to need to do just to figure out, hey, do I comply with the standard or not? Updating the net energy use, that's just part of the process of determining compliance. But then there's some other elements down here talking about like documenting current changes, number of occupants, energy audits if applicable, maintaining this list of energy efficiency measures, things like a method to inform occupants about the benefits of energy use and instruct them in the use and adjustment of operable windows, HVAC controls. Are these critical elements that we would expect a building owner to put into a management plan? That's what I'm hoping to get some discussion about today. So I see that JP has a hand raised, and then Alex.
Mine was from last time. You can move on.
Okay, great. Alex.
Yeah, so I think just to frame this conversation a little bit, right? What we're trying to discuss is an energy management plan is typically to ensure a building meets its compliance targets when it gets to that point, or improves, as necessary. And what we're trying to determine in this discussion is when is it helpful and when is it maybe an outsized burden for building owners, right? So how do we balance what a building burden on the building owner with ensuring we're meeting those targets, right? Like you were saying, there are certain aspects here that seem important to achieve that goal, and then others where maybe it gets removed, or maybe it's becomes an aspect of an energy management plan for non-compliant building, right? Just kind of that's what we're kind of trying to determine. Would you agree with that statement, Blake?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I think there's some components that are necessary just to figure out like where a building stands relative to compliance. And then there's some just more complex parts of it that aren't necessarily necessary to determine compliance, but could help support it, but could also add a high level of work for the building owner and manager to do. So Kevin, looks like you have a hand raised.
Oh yeah, thanks. I was curious. So at the moment, items 1 through 14 are all shall. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So it kind of leads off with this shall incorporate component. So mainly kind of interested here if there's kind of like Alex was mentioning about if there's an opportunity to kind of keep the critical pieces, and is there a need or opportunity to reduce the a burden on a building owner with regard to just putting this plan together and maintaining it. So I don't know if there's any specific open to hearing comments on either any specific items here or just like general ones about like, yes, need to keep everything in there, or general guidance of kind of feel free to remove the ones that aren't maybe necessary for just determining BPS compliance, sort of a thing. Like because there's elements like a capital management plan that as of right now would be part of the energy management plan too. So. And that capital management plan includes things like sizing calculations for HVAC equipment in the event that equipment needs to be replaced. So like having those prepared.
Maybe like based on what you said, I agree that there's probably measures that could be removed or could be optional or could be in the case of non-compliance. I think there's some maybe that I know that the O&M we're going to talk about in the next chapter too, specifically, but yeah, I think that's a good point. Like the equipment sizing, the question is how useful that is, particularly if that's if that in the beginning, maybe it's a newer building, so it's newer equipment, and then later on, 5 years later, when in the compliance period, it's somewhat outdated already. So it's double work. Obviously, I think we all agree that equipment sizing is critical for performance. That's like we talked earlier about commissioning. The design is critical, but the question is if it's as part of the energy management plan, it's a little out of place.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Vin.
And certainly, we do incorporate a lot of these in the city of Portland in our energy management plans, and I think that's probably where we need that expertise in the room right now, is the folks who actually have set these up to inform us of what's critical, what's not. And it does make me think of things like the Energy Trust Path to Net Zero program, and whether they have a follow-up to that to receive the incentive. I believe it. I don't know if it's an energy management plan, but something like that. Maybe that's a good reference point. If folks are familiar with that, I'm not familiar enough with it to speak to it. I just know that that seems like a good program because they're trying to assure that their incentive is going. It's a substantial incentive is being implemented in a way that makes sense for everyone. But I do want to highlight one other thing here is to the point that we're making earlier. I think you do want to include emissions, although not emissions management plan, but as part of the energy management plan, ahead of the list of 14 items, I think you do want to include emissions in there. I saw them kind of crossed out, but I think that's the data you do want.
Okay, yeah, and I think that kind of reflects our earlier discussion, and I agree that based on our earlier discussion, there's an opportunity to kind of bring that back into like energy plan with emissions assessment, sort of or energy accounting system with emissions assessment.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, because I can see most of that cross out section there, with the exception of GHGI.
Yeah,
being applicable there.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. And I wonder if Kevin asked the question before about like right now all of these things are under shall. Maybe there's an opportunity for the shall to apply to based on the way that we word it, to some of the items, but then the other ones maybe become a may, like where if they're a little bit more involved, or they could become part of a plan, particularly if a building owner is working with like Energy Trust on Path to Net Zero or another utility that has a program designed around these specific energy management plans, like SEM or something like that, to help get there. But wouldn't necessarily be something that we look for as an agency when we're looking for the plan that's submitted for compliance. So just kind of a thought there.
Blake, does Washington include all of them?
Washington's is pretty complex and specific, and all of these are included in Washington's. So I'm not exactly sure. I mean, their compliance hasn't yet kicked in, but I don't know how they're managing actually tracking all of some of these items in there too. Like just for example, like the energy management plan asks for a lighting schedule, and that at least to me seems like it would be somewhat challenging to actually confirm if across the board if folks are creating those lighting schedules for all the lights in a building. But yeah, Washington does include all these items in their management plan. Good kind of question for reference there for context. Kara.
Yeah, thanks, Blake. I guess I would ask maybe for two things from you. I mean, the first is letting us know maybe highlighting what you for sure need
Okay.
in order to evaluate compliance, because then that helps us focus on the others that maybe aren't necessary. And then the other thing I would say is circling up with Washington regulatory folks to find out maybe from their perspective what they anticipate being problematic. I just want to echo the comments that were made at the beginning of this conversation about really we want this to be successful. And so sort of the least amount of information we can ask for that will be the least burdensome, but give us the most success is sort of our sweet spot. But Vin's right that the folks in the room, I certainly couldn't speak to which of these you would need, nor which of these would be helpful in an energy management plan. But certainly my preference would be fewer rather than more.
Thanks, Kara. Yeah, and I guess if I were to just kind of get to the question, to the point about like which ones would be critical, I think it's the ones mainly at the beginning. After like things like the accounting system, the energy use intensity, annual updates, comparison of the EUI to the adjusted EUI, like these are critical components of a plan that a building owner needs to do to document and determine their compliance. As you get further down the line, like maybe starting around like 5.2.9, those are like informing occupants about the benefits of the use, the training plan, like those are all beneficial items that I could see maybe having some benefit and value for a building owner. But I don't know that our agency would be as concerned about actually seeing those and verifying those in a plan. So maybe that's where like the may comes in.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because seeing them listed will prompt maybe some ideas for them about the benefits.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I think that's
we can maybe kind of prioritize those a little bit for a future draft. Yeah. Okay, I guess kind of moving down the line, that the next section, then like the end of that section talks about updating, reviewing, and signing the management plan annually. And then I did want to point out one change we made here too to 5.1.3. ASHRAE Standard 100 says that the energy manager shall provide a copy of that plan to the building occupants. And I wasn't sure exactly what that means and how enforceable something like that is, where they expected to actually like physically give a copy to every building occupant. To me, that was a little bit vague, so I modified it just to be make available a copy, where it's available for somebody to view if they want to view it. But I don't know that we want to like say that they got to like distribute a copy of it to each occupant annually. So
seems smart.
Okay, and then the next section, building energy and emissions monitoring. So this section was another one where we had to again kind of go back and change the net, or add in net where ASHRAE had a reference to gross. Alex, you have a hand raised.
Yes, sorry, that was that's going back to shall
yeah.
provide or make available.
Yeah.
And I mean, generally, I think it's great to educate tenants, right?
Yeah.
So make available if it's if nobody knows or it's hard to find. So I wonder if there's a better balance. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Somehow maybe at least communicate where like that is available on request or where it could be found. But make available gives maybe too in the script, right? So that it's hard for tenants or leasees to find that information.
Okay.
And I think one of the 14 items was tenant education. And that seems like a valuable thing that maybe should be a shall. And I think it would dovetail with this piece about making it available or whatever, that if you're providing the education and then say,
I'm not gonna
here's the
find it.
document,
I understand what you're saying.
or here's the link to the document or whatever.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
I
I think
understand
Alex
your
is right.
point there, Alex.
It's kind of squishy to define, but needs to be defined. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I understand.
And kind of echoing what you're saying there, Kevin, I think there's an opportunity in here also just to focus on conservation to meet the standards, right? It doesn't all have to be energy efficiency, and the tenants are key to the conservation and education of the tenants could be like enormous. Just thinking like multifamily, where there can be like cultural aspects of like in winter leave all the doors open for or a window open for fresh air, and then it's leaking like a sieve, and we're paying higher energy bills. And but if there's some education around like, hey, now it's going to cost more for rent because we're going to have to meet this state's future requirement if we continue to just let energy be wasted. That might make a really big difference and really bring folks into the above the average threshold.
Yeah, I have to second that, Vin, that there's been studies on behavioral measures, they call them, that they can be very profound and very cheap, which is handy.
And all the energy efficiency in the world won't get to that,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Nothing uses less energy than off. So, yeah.
The teenager.
Yeah, thanks for those comments. So the next section about building energy monitoring was one where we had to again go back and change all ASHRAE 90.1 or ASHRAE 100's references to gross energy use, change that to net. So this was a change that Standard 100 made with the recent version that we're having to kind of undo. Previous versions actually looked at net energy use and gave credit for on-site production, renewable energy production. The most recent version doesn't. It looks at gross, so it actually would count like on-site renewable energy production against a building's total energy use, which is not the way that the statute in Oregon's BPS defines it. So we just made the necessary corrections there to the way that it's worded, adding net in there, and then also to the equation where it calculates and considers any on-site generation. And then I just changed the description here to match the definition in the statute, and then change the representative equation to also match how it's described in the statute too. And then if I can just scroll down here, the ASHRAE 100 2024 includes this graphic that shows on-site energy, external energy delivered, and then any energy that's exported. So what I've done is just delete that graphic, and I actually brought back a graphic from the previous version of Standard 100 that shows kind of the same flows, but it's all based on net energy instead of what the new version of the standard is referring to gross energy. So just to highlight that all the changes in this section are mainly just to reflect the need to consider gross energy, or the need to consider net energy and not gross energy usage. And then Vin, I see you have hand raised, but I'll just kind of point out these informative notes here, and then I'll go to you about examples of excess energy exported from a building for beneficial use. Includes energy used for recharging EVs. So that was one element that was in the statute around the ability for a building owner to subtract out any sort of transportation specific energy consumption from their building UI. So that's in there too. So that's kind of considered an exported energy from the building. Same as any sort of on-site renewable energy that's delivered to the electric grid and not used by the building. So if there's any energy that's delivered to the grid and not used, that doesn't contribute to a building energy use. And then in 5.2.2, it does provide this criteria for if exported energy cannot be measured, it shall be estimated using a methodology that's acceptable to the AHJ. So this provides that pathway that I think we discussed in the last meeting, that in some cases, like for example, EV electric usage might be measured, but in a lot of cases it's not measured. So there's this pathway for specifying a way to estimate that and subtract it from a building's overall use to exclude it, to remove it from the building's total net energy use. So, yeah, Ben, you've got a hand raised.
While I'm listing the EVs in there, I think the methodology of kind of estimating those a little questionable, because somebody who uses a large fleet of EVs and is using them constantly, like the city, it's a huge energy consumer. But then often, unfortunately, yes, EVs can also sit around, or for purposes of storage, or there's other reasons not to drive. Like a lot of folks have EVs who don't like to drive, prefer not to drive. That they might get a benefit from the estimation that isn't really appropriate, I guess. And then places like the city would probably be underestimating that, and so then their EUI would be adjusted in the wrong way. So, and I think it's as much as possible to just make it based on sub-metering of the EV. It's an incentive to sub-meter, and it's a value to them, I think, for anyone to have their EVs sub-metered. But my actual comment was around net. So we have been using gross at the city because we're looking at, like, what is the energy intensity of the building? So what's the total energy consumption? And Portfolio Manager supports that really well. When it gets into renewable energy, and I know that EPA has been improving this, but Portfolio Manager has really become more challenging, I think, to try to capture different ways of recording renewable energy. So that just flagging for you all that it may be resolved now, but there was a time where we just took net energy use completely off the table, not only like philosophically, because of wanting to have the full energy use of the building being reported, because it's investments in energy efficiency that we're trying to promote. But because energy efficiency should be combined with renewable energy was our thinking around that. But also Portfolio Manager was just not supportive of calculating that energy. So that might require a sub-meter as well, and kind of some back-end calculations. So I would just look into it as a recommendation with Portfolio Manager and checking with EPA to see how well they can support net. I would imagine that if Washington is doing this, the EPA has made it easier. But it is, and I do like the approach, by the way. Like, I think we in the city would want to adjust our approach to yours. Because it does get to future building performance standards. Like, a solution is to have solar energy. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, understood. Thanks, Ben. Alex.
Yeah, I'm. So we have now the word campus show up, and remind me how that's addressed. I know there's always a conversation around building performance standards in campus, whether a campus is looked as a whole, right, as one building or individual buildings, which I think is significant, right, because it will be come into compliance requirements earlier if it's seen as one building. I have to admit I don't know all the pros and cons just yet, but since it's showing up right now, do you have an initial take on, does Odo have a take on how campuses should be considered in this or not? I am inclined to like viewing it as a one building just because their energy flows are so interconnected, and opportunities are as well. But yeah, I'm curious or if you're getting to that specifically.
I think it's something we need to think through a little bit more. Honestly, I'm not sure if they would be considered in like one whole building for the purpose of like over the building size threshold for earlier compliance. But I know that in Washington, there is a pathway for a campus to document and show compliance as a whole, particularly where like if all the campus is served from 1 meter, then it might be easier just to show compliance as a whole, even if it's not part of like the larger buildings phase timeline for compliance. But I think that is something we need to, at least I think we need to think about a little bit more how we treat those campus buildings. We don't have that fully defined yet. Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks. In a similar vein, maybe not a campus, but more of a district energy or a thermal energy network system. It seems like the way this is worded addresses that, because it's looking at a building and then it talks about energy flows between buildings. There would just have to be some mechanism for metering that, but it seems like it addresses that.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to raise the question, does it? Because I'm not entirely sure. And then the other,
Yeah.
I have another question, but we can talk about that one a little bit if you'd like.
Yeah, I'll just point out, so like it does address the district energy situations. Like if you look at the net energy use, it talks like 1A, B, C, and D, and some of those are, if you go down to how those are defined, it's got electrical, gas, bulk fuel, and also like steam, hot water, chill water that's delivered to the building. So those are one of the inputs in there. So they would have to be metered, but it definitely considers that district energy approach. Yeah.
Great. And then the other question is just my own ignorance. For EV chargers, do the chargers themselves have some form of metering? I know that you can purchase a charge and therefore you're paying for the kWhs, but is that an appropriate way or an alternative method to account for the energy used by EV stations?
I don't know all if anyone else has any input, but I know like the ones on our building, you can look and see how much has been delivered for charging over a period. So
yeah,
I think that's relatively common, but I can't say if it's true for every charger.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I do see there's some comments in the chat, and we'll definitely review those and take those into consideration. So, and then we're also recognizing that we have just about 15 minutes left today. The other parts, and we're still on the energy management plan, but we're almost done with that chapter. The other parts of this chapter just have to do with site energy calculations, and we just removed the requirements or any references to source energy and greenhouse gas emissions. The standard 100 does provide these site energy conversion factors, and these are just like the energy content of different fuels. But we are going to reference the factors that are in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and I think they're all the same. But again, we just would want, if somebody's entering in their activity usage data into Portfolio Manager, it'll just use the energy, like the BTUs per gallon of fuel that's already embedded into Portfolio Manager. And then we've removed the greenhouse gas emissions factors conversion tables because those won't apply for Oregon. And we've removed the source energy conversion tables as well, along with the regional eGrid electricity factors. So, and then the last section of the energy management plan section talks about the responsibilities of an energy manager. That we've actually changed this to May because there's some elements in here that I feel could be a little bit restrictive in how much we're going to want to be checking about what an energy manager is doing. Like, as an energy manager shall be the one that purchases energy, shall be responsible for public relations matters related to energy. And I don't know if it's part of a building performance standard to fully define how an organization develops their roles and responsibilities for what an energy manager does and doesn't do. So we've just included this here as kind of guidance about what a energy manager may be responsible for doing, but it's not a specific requirement of the, at least as it's worded with this change of the BPS. And then so the last section that I was hoping to kind of get through today would be this operations and maintenance requirements section that basically just requires certain O&M plans and implementation to be put into place by a building owner. And it requires the O&M shall be implemented in according with this appendix C, and we'll get to that in a future meeting. But O&M programs developed and implemented, there's this exception where if there's a utility that's implementing a program, then that could also satisfy the requirement for the O&M plan. And this is a similar exception. We pulled that one from the Washington process too. Again, just a similar exception or addition that was made to Washington about built into the plan that replacement equipment shall meet all applicable energy efficiency requirements and federal standards, state standards, and applicable building code. And then there's this requirement around when lighting equipment's replaced, the replacement equipment shall meet the, it's worded as the most stringent, but we just changed it to all applicable energy efficiency requirements in federal equipment standards, state equipment standards, and the building code. No real need to specify most stringent. It just needs to meet any applicable standards. And then that actually kind of wraps up the O&M language section there too. But I guess just to kind of take a step back within this section, the operations and maintenance tasks, maintenance for all equipment, components, and systems shall be in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations and shall also include tasks to maintain efficiency, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then it points to this informative annex, and the informative annexes are just that, they're informative, but they're not necessarily a prescriptive part of the standard. So it kind of points to that there. So I guess that kind of gets us through all of the draft language. Thanks everybody a lot for the comments today. I know we've talked about a lot, and then there's been a number of things put in the chat there too. And then I would definitely encourage folks, if you do have any additional comments, you can do that through the comment form. And those can be either specific comments about specific rule language in there, or just general general comments providing some direction to us as we go through our recommendations. And I put a link to that comment portal up in the headers of every page within the rules here. So if you have any comments there, and again, if you are able to provide those comments back by the end of this week, that would be really helpful for us as we prepare for the public rulemaking draft that's happening in 2 weeks. So we have a comment. Yes, I can place the comment form in the chat. Let's do that. There we go. Okay, I guess with that, are there any other, any other kind of final closing comments or questions here?
I have a logistical question about just using WebEx.
Yeah.
But I could wait till everybody else is done too.
Okay. All right. I think we can go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just was thanking you and saying goodbye.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks. Is that Kara?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, thanks for your input. Thanks for being here and reviewing with us. Yeah, you can go ahead, Vin.
Oh, trying to figure out I think I just found it. Never mind. Just found the chat. feel like I spoke maybe too much in the meeting, so it'd be helpful to know where the chat was, but also I couldn't find it just to be able to see. Now I think I found it. Never mind. So I should be good now.
Okay,
I'll
great.
take a look at the chat. But I will note that I've had issues with WebEx kind of consistently with getting in for years now with Odo, and there was a email that was sent to me from some type of WebEx administrator, and that had just a button to join the webinar, and it's the first time I've seen that, and that worked really well. I was able to just jump right into the meeting versus scramble for 5 minutes trying to sort through audio and all that. So really, I don't know how that happened, but or if you're involved in that or not, but it works great.
Did that come like about an hour before the meeting started?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Because I got the same one, and I think that might be a new feature of WebEx. I don't know that I remember getting it in the past either, but it was helpful.
It was a
Hopefully
relief,
it's
yeah.
helpful
Just
for
to push
other
one button
folks
and
too.
join. I loved it.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks. And if you want to follow up about campus stuff, that is something that we've been encountering a lot here. And there are cases where we have like a campus that has renewable energy on one building that serves multiple buildings, but also feeds back into the utility. And so they have like utility agreements. So it gets complicated very fast when you have renewable energy plus campus metering plus sub metering or not.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. I'd love to follow up. I'll put that on my list.
Thanks, bye.
Yeah. Thanks, Finn. And with that, I'll hang online in case anyone else wants to chat about anything. But thanks, everybody. I'm looking forward to our next meeting that is scheduled for. You've all got it on your calendars, but I'll just make sure I note it. So our next RAC meeting is scheduled for June 26th, same time, 1 o'clock, and then again we'll have that public rulemaking meeting on June 5th. So certainly encourage anybody to join if they're available. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.
Day.
Yeah. It's amazing how well this is getting paced out.
Hopefully it keeps it this pace too. Thanks. I appreciate the comments, Kevin.
You bet. Take care, everybody.
Well, looks like everyone's logged up except for Wendy and Abby. So thanks a lot, Wendy and Abby, for helping out with this. Wendy, were you able to take some notes, hopefully?
Yes, I took a lot of notes, so I will definitely share those with you.
All right, thanks.
Great,
thanks. All right, well, thanks you all. Have a good day.